Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nancy Wodrago with U of I Extension, Community and Economic Development. We're happy to host another Digital Equities Grant Capacity Building webinar today, brought to you by the Illinois Office of Broadband and the Illinois Broadband Lab. Happy to welcome Devin Bronstein back, who's going to kick off today's session as well and introduce your other presenters today. Welcome, Devin, and thank you so much for being here, and you can take it from here.
Great. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon and happy Wednesday. For those of you who I might not know, my name is Devin Bronstein, and I lead the Illinois Office of Broadband here at the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. So today's webinar is the third in our Part 2 Digital Equity Grants Capacity Building webinar series. And so what this means overall is as we anticipate and inch towards lots of grant opportunities for nonprofits, local governments, community-based organizations this fall, we want to do our part in providing the information and the support that prospective grantees need to put forth their best grant applications and feel ready to navigate some of the red tape that comes with applying for and then receiving a state or federal grant. So that is the premise for today's webinar, and we will be specifically focusing on a deeper dive into grants writing, and I'll be joined by Terry Simmons, who is the president of the Illinois Minority Business Development Agency Business Center, who will be doing our deep dive topic today. So before we get started, I'll run through some housekeeping, and then I'll go through a little bit of context setting slides. So I'll share some background on the context that we're operating in with the Digital Equity Act. Then I will hand it over to Terry to go through a presentation for the majority of the session today, and we will close with a Q&A. But feel free to throw questions into the chat, and we will address them at the end of today's session. Objectives: by the end of this webinar, we hope that you'll understand the important elements of a NOFO, or Notice of Funding Opportunity. You'll know how to apply for grants, and you'll have some best practices for managing your grants post-award. This is a sort of snapshot of the current webinar series that we are in. So we are at August 14th. If you missed the previous two, you can find those on our website. We will share the link. And then next week is our final webinar in the series around leveraging data for storytelling. All right. So we like to set this context at the beginning of all of these webinars because I know we have some new folks and some return participants. But we are here today because the state published a digital equity plan that charts out over the next 5+ years how Illinois will achieve universal broadband connectivity and make sure that all households, all communities have the tools, resources, confidence, devices that they need to use the internet to reach their full potential and thrive. So Illinois was required to publish a plan on how to get here. And following the approval of this plan, we unlocked $23.7 million for Illinois to start implementing it. So you'll see on the slide 5 core activities. These are the ways that we will implement our plan, so kind of categorizing them into different buckets. One of these buckets is called the Digital Equity Grant Program. So we will be rolling out a grant program this fall that pushes these funds from the state out into communities to stand up programs to help close the digital divide. So we spent the last several months getting feedback from lots of stakeholders and prospective grantees on what exactly this grant program should look like. So this slide shows a series of potential topic areas or project types that folks could apply for funding to roll out or expand, grow if they're already doing this type of work. This is all subject to change, subject to be refined. We are still in the design phase, but just so you can start thinking about what you might want to apply for, it will likely look like something like this. So this includes device distribution programs, so giving out laptops and tablets to members of your community, funding for standing up coaching or digital skill building workshops or educational opportunities. So how to use Microsoft Word to write a resume, how to buy plane tickets online, lots of topics to just get comfortable with using computers and the internet. And then several other programs down here that for time's sake, we'll just let you glaze over those for now. Always important to reinforce that any program funded through the Digital Equity Act is required to serve covered populations. So you can see these populations, essentially identity groups in Illinois, listed out on this slide. So any future grant applications will ask you to tell us which group you are really focused on. We would love to see organizations who have a lot of expertise or existing relationships just serving one or two groups. So maybe you serve incarcerated individuals or returning residents, maybe older adults, maybe rural communities, but really looking for those areas of expertise. And again, all of that will come out this fall, but this is important to just start getting the wheels turning. All right, so another reminder, next week we have our Leveraging Data for Storytelling webinar. So with that, if you have questions about the specific Digital Equity Act funding opportunities or grant programs, don't hesitate to throw those in the chat and we will cover that after the fact. But for now, I'm very excited to pass the mic to Terry Simmons to take us through grants, best practices, tips, and tricks. And Terry, I will stop sharing and then allow you to share your screen.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Let me go here and thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity to share information on grants and how to apply for them. So I'm just going to share my screen here now, and I hope you guys can see it.
It is, yep.
All right. Well, good afternoon. As Devin said, my name is Terry Simmons, and I am the operator of the Illinois Minority Business Development Agency Business Center. And I am the owner of Strategic Exceptions Professional Consulting, which is a consulting firm. We have offices, our physical offices located in Elgin and Aurora. However, we serve businesses throughout the state of Illinois. This slide here just talked a little bit about me and my background. I have 35 years of experience in just professional development, business coaching, and business development. I spent 27 years at ComEd in different leadership roles and positions. And so right now, my role is running my company and operating the Illinois Minority Business Development Agency, and a little bit about the Illinois MBDA. The Illinois MBDA is part of the U.S. Department of Commerce and the Minority Business Development Agency. And the MBDA is a federal agency within the U.S. Department of Commerce that aids the growth and global competitiveness of minority business enterprises and really help them unlock their full economic potential. Our center is funded in part by the U.S. Department of Commerce, and there's about 40 other equities or MBDA centers that's located throughout the United States that also serve minority-owned businesses. We have other specialty centers that's a part of the MBDA as well. And there's about 750 corporate members that's a part of our network. We serve our businesses in both English and Spanish. We help businesses get access to capital, loans, grants, investors, and other resources that they need in order to grow. And we also provide customized strategic business consulting through the MBDA. Just to highlight some of our body of work, we serve, like I stated, we serve businesses throughout the state of Illinois, and we work very closely with a lot of different agencies, such as the Department of Commerce and other state and federal agencies, to make sure that we provide the resources and services that our businesses need here in the state of Illinois. We also provide workshops. So this is one of our upcoming workshops that we're hosting tomorrow, actually, in Aurora. And this series that we're doing is a 4-month series. We started it in July, and we'll be going through October, and we'll be stopping in Aurora. We call it our Access to Capital Voyage. And tomorrow we'll be taking a tour in Aurora, in partnership with the Aurora Regional Chamber of Commerce, the Aurora Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Women's Business Development Center and Wintrust Community Bank. So what we're going to talk about today, how to apply for grants, is a part of a workshop, a 2-day workshop that we actually do, where we really peel back the layers and help businesses identify some of the grants that they can particularly apply for, and what if their eligibility meets the guidelines or the requirements of that particular grant. So in that 2-day session, we talk businesses through how to apply for grants, as well as we take a deeper dive into some grant opportunities that may be available for them. So for today, what we're going to talk about, there's going to be a brief introduction to grants, some common places to find grants, the pre-award phase, which is applying for grants, the post-award phase, how to manage the grant once you receive it, and then we'll talk about a few, just how you can find some upcoming grant opportunities. So for the pre-award phase involves the reviewing the funding announcement and the particularly application review. So once the award comes out, you identify if the award fits within your mission and your goals. Then there's a review of the application and the eligibility. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. There are some critical steps to applying for a grant. First, as I mentioned before, once the award comes out, you want to become familiar with the award and the award's life cycle. Identifying grants that applies to you is another critical step in the grant life cycle. Identifying whether you are a good fit, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the eligibility things here. Searching for a grant to apply for it. We'll talk some about locations where you can go, websites where you can find grants. We'll talk a little bit, but not much, about the eligibility. I think there was a prior segment that talked about some of the eligibility when you're looking to apply for grants. Some of the prerequisites or the grant documents. We'll talk about how to register in the different portals and apply for the grant application, and then uploading all of those documents into the different portals. So there's a number of steps to applying for the grant. So we listed about 7 for you to consider here. The pre-award stage and some common places to find grants. You can find grants at the Illinois DCEO website. If you're not familiar with the Illinois DCEO website, it's dceo.gov, pretty simple. The DCEO also has a newsletter, and you can subscribe to their newsletter, where they share a lot of information regarding grants that are available in the state of Illinois. You can join the Illinois MBDA Business Center, so you can become a partner with us or a client. Grants.gov is also another location where you can find grants. You can also find grants at the United States SBA website, the Small Business Administration's website. There's another website, usgrants.org. It is a great resource for finding grants. Most federal, state, and local government agencies will list funding opportunities on their websites. So when you go to their websites, there's normally a designation or a drop down or a tab that highlights what funding opportunities are available. Like I mentioned before, there's newsletters that a lot of state and federal agencies that you can subscribe to. And in those newsletters, there's a lot of great communication on all types of tools and resources, including grants. And there's also websites if you're looking to apply to community, private, or any family or corporate foundations. You can also find information on funding opportunities at their websites as well. So those are some places where you can find grants. Grants are quite complex. It's a lot of work. So because of that, only about 1 in 10 grant proposals are accepted because it requires a lot of work. It requires a lot of checks and balances. So one of the requirements is to make sure that you're eligible for the application. If you're not eligible, your grant may not be accepted. If your paperwork is incorrect or incomplete, your grant application will not be accepted. And if your grant is submitted late, your grant application, chances are it will not be accepted. So one of the things I always like to highlight, pay attention to the time zone, because if it's a grant that has to be turned in at an Eastern time zone, which we're in Central Time, if you're in Illinois, they're an hour ahead of us. So if the grant states that it has to be turned in by 11:59 p.m., that's 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So you want to make sure that you understand the time zones for the grant that you're applying for. So I want to talk a little bit now about preparing the necessary grant paperwork. One of the reasons that I created a workshop on what's that grant paperwork all about, because when I first started doing business development work with the Women's Business Development Center, one of the main concerns that I found that business owners had, and one of the reasons why they were hesitant and reluctant about applying for grants, because there's a lot of paperwork involved. So I created a workshop called What's That Paperwork All About? To help business owners understand the paperwork required to apply for grants. So we'll talk a little bit about that. It's very important to know what paperwork is required for each type of grant that you're applying for. Every grant is different. So it's important that you read the notification thoroughly. Your team, if you have a team of folks that's going to be helping you complete your application, make sure that you read the application thoroughly so that you understand what paperwork. And I would say one of the first things that you want to do is create a task list of everything that you need for the grant, including the paperwork. Paperwork is critical, and it normally takes the most time. So we'll talk a little bit more about paperwork. So some of the standard grant paperwork is your application form. When you're filling out your application, there are some designations that you will be required to include in your application, such as your unique business identifier, your UEI, your EIN number, which is your tax identifying number. So if you have not applied and you don't have those things, those are requirements. You will need some character references or letters of support. So those are documents you want to get. You want to get those documents prepared early as possible. So once you understand what's required in the grant, you want to go ahead and get your letters of support out to your character references as soon as possible. The same thing applies with your partnership agreements or your MOUs or your memos of understanding. Some grants will require MOUs. Some grants will require letters of support. So it's very important that you understand the paperwork requirements so you can get those documents prepared as early in the grant application process as possible. You will need proof of capability. What are you capable of doing? It's your business resume. Within the application, you will have to talk about your capabilities, your past history, your past successes. What capabilities do you have to show or demonstrate that you can actually fulfill the requirements of the grant application? Another critical piece of paperwork is the budget. You would need most times your project budget, the organization budget, the budget narrative, and the justification for your cost. So the numbers, you have to know your numbers. The next document that's critically important in the grant paperwork is the project narrative. The project narrative includes details on the entire project, the entire scope. How are you going to get the work done? And within the project narrative, most times you have to inject your budget narrative as well. So, and then if there's a match, if there's a portion of the grant that you're required to match, and just really quickly, what a match is, for instance, if the grant is $400,000, and the application or the notice of funding opportunity, or the NOFO, which is the grant information that comes out to tell you everything about the grant, is referred to as the NOFO, or the notice of funding opportunity. Within that funding opportunity, it will tell you whether there is a match required. So if the grant is 400,000 and the match is 25%, then you will match 25% of that $400,000. So then your business or your nonprofit would be responsible for securing $100,000 of that total budget for that body of work. So if there's a match requirement, you need to know that. And then you also have to indicate within your budget narrative and within your project narrative, how are you going to secure those funds? So that is about 7 of the basic required standard pieces of paperwork for the grant application. I don't know if there's any questions out there, but I think we're holding questions to the end, so I'll keep going. Okay. The next piece of paperwork, the next documents or paperwork that's required, is the standard federal grant form. So there's always some standard grant forms. So I'm going to highlight federal grant forms. So there's an SF 424, and every document that you fill out would normally, almost always, has a name. So each document will have a name, and one of the requirements as an individual who is receiving grants and you have to respond to the grant is understanding all of the documents, the names of the documents, and all of the reporting periods that go along with these documents. So some of the standard federal grant forms, the SF-24, is your application for federal assistance. So that is a document that you would have to fill out and send in with all of your paperwork. The SF 424A contains your budget information related to if this is a non-construction program. So if you're in construction, your documents will be different for a federal grant. And your SF 424 must be submitted for all budget periods. So if your grant is for 5 years, for each budget period, when you submit for the grant, you have to show 5 different budgets for that 5-year grant period. The next document is the SF 424B, which is another federal grant form. And that is your assurances for non-construction program. So you have to fill out that document to make sure that you're indicating all of your assurances for your programs that are non-construction related. And then you also have to disclose in the SFLLL your disclosure of lobbying activities. And then the CD 511 is the certification regarding lobbying, your certification regarding disbarment, suspension and other responsibility matters. Also, your certification around keeping a drug-free workplace. And so these are just some of the main documents required for a federal, or some of the main grant forms some of the main forms required when you are seeking a federal grant. Okay. Some things you'll need to accept a grant. You will need a basic business bank account. So you'll need to receive the funding when it's awarded. So you will need a way to receive this funding once it is awarded to you. Just bear with me here. I'm just having a few technology challenges, and I know you guys know that that happens, right? All right. Okay, so you will need a few specific documents, you will need a bank account and a business bank account. And for sole proprietors, you may be able to use your personal banking account. However, for businesses, if you are a business, I would just suggest that you have a business bank account. All right, next, we're going to talk about submitting your grant application. Submitting the grant application. So when you're submitting your grant application, it's important that you know the type of grant that you are applying for, because that is going to be dependent. Your grant submission requirements are dependent on the type of grant that you're applying for. So it's important that you understand and read your notification or your funding opportunities so that you will know your submission requirements. So don't forget, be familiar with your NOFO. It's important. Okay. So some tips to avoid having late grant submissions. Pay attention to the grant deadline. I mentioned earlier about time zones. Pay attention to the date, the time, and when the grant is due. Register as early as possible in the online application system. This is very important, you all. The process to register in these systems can take several days. Register early as possible. Register as early as possible. Make sure all of your designations are renewed, your sam.gov, all of those things, make sure they are renewed annually so that you can take advantage of the grant opportunities, because if your sam.gov is not renewed and it's not up to date, then you will not be able to submit for funding opportunities. The other thing is, do not wait until the last minute. Submit your grant application. I would suggest a couple of days early, because systems like grant.gov, they require a few hours or days to confirm that your application is submitted. So you don't want to take a chance that your grant application is not received due to technical concerns. The other thing is, submitting early allows you time. If you have technical issues, it allows you time to work through those issues so that you can get your submittal in on time. Okay, once you receive the funding, once you receive the grant, once you receive the award, when you are awarded the funding or the grant, you normally are notified either by phone or by email. Within that notification and within email, it will include the next steps you need to take. Some things that you will most likely have to do is you have to go into the funding system and accept the grant. So there's different systems for different awards. Some grantees have a system for the actual paperwork where you do all your paperwork submitting, and then they have another system where they actually fund you, where the money goes to your bank account. So regardless, you must take the next steps of accepting the award once you receive the notification, accessing the fund, understanding how to access the funds and then the system that's required, And then all of the training that's required that goes along with your funding, you're responsible for making sure that you attend that training so you can be familiar with all of your reporting and all the things that you have to do to make sure that you're meeting the grant requirements. And then you're familiar with all of the different systems that are required for you to be able to manage and care for that grant. Okay, reporting on your awarded grant. Different grants have different reporting requirements. You may have to report on your performance and your finances on a quarterly or an annual basis. Again, it depends on the notice of funding opportunity or the grant requirements as it relates to your reporting. Again, make sure that's a part of being familiar with your funding, being familiar with your award. But regardless, you will be required to report on those metrics or that performance that you stated that you were going to achieve when you applied for the funding. You're also responsible for reporting on how you've used the funding awarded and show that you've kept within the constraints of the budget and that you are meeting the requirements of how you stated that you were going to use the finances, and also based upon the requirements within the grant. So we talked a lot about the pre-award, the post-award. Now, if you're looking for upcoming grant opportunities, you can contact us, as well as the other areas that I mentioned. I think we gave you about 10 different locations: DCEO, grants.gov. Early on in the presentation, I mentioned a number of places where you can go and find funding opportunities, but also you can contact us. And here's our contact information, including our cell phone number, our website, and our email. And this is how you can reach us. My name is Terry Simmons, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all about how to apply for grants and also how to manage them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Terry, for that overview. Let's open it up to questions if folks want to hear anything in more detail or have specific questions for Terry.
I have a question about the grant narrative. Um,
Okay.
you were talking about how you would sort of dramatize out like what do the projects look like and how you're going to get the grant, how are you going to get the work done with the grant, et cetera, in the project narrative. Do you do you think the project narrative can be used for other things, or do you think that entities tend to be really strict about what that entails and what that's supposed to be meant for? Because I've been told in the past that if we want to put like lots of data in there, we can, but I just wonder how helpful sometimes that is. You know, data, it could be census data or data about the need or the the parity that would be being addressed, etc. So do you have any sort of guidelines on like what's too much and is that appropriate or
Well, depending on the requirements of the grant, most grants you have to state the need, and data is one way to show highlight that point, right? um, a lot of the grants that I've written recently are focused on socially and economically disadvantaged individuals, so we are always doing research and data to identify what's the current data in the marketplace to prove the concept that we really need to provide this service in this particular area. So data is a valuable asset for your proof of concept.
do you think it strengthens the narrative, or and that if it does get left out for some reason, maybe it's just one of those things where you can't find the data. Do you think that puts someone at a disadvantage in their application?
Yes, because understanding and knowing the need is critically important in the project narrative. It's why are we can always do things, right? But within that region or that area of focus, why is there a need, right? What is the population? Who are you going to serve within that population? So, like I stated, data is a valuable tool to highlight the fact that there is a need. And so I would say always use data. I mean, but within the NOFO will guide you and tell you pretty much what is required within that notice of funding opportunity. But I can almost guarantee you the funding opportunities that's coming out now in the marketplace, the data points are critical to prove the need or show the need for that particular opportunity that you're applying for. And I hope that makes sense.
Yes, thank you so much. And while we were just discussing that, we did have one anonymous submission directly to me for a question here. So I'll go ahead and just pose that to you. Uh, would love to hear more about different forms of community support and what is considered good demonstration of support. That could also, I'm not for sure, and this person can verify to me, but I think also the sort of community benefits
Mm-hmm.
agreements and such that may play into some grants that could be about that as well.
Yeah.
What sort of different forms of community support might be strong for grant applications?
So I highlighted a slide that showed my body of work, and that's data, right? And so most of the individuals, if you will, that I work with and that I partner with on those slides are uh, it's community work that I've done. So when I'm applying for funding, I call on those folks to say, hey, we've done a lot of great work together, and here's an opportunity. And will you support me in this opportunity because we've done this great work? So within that story or that memo or that show of support, we'll write that story within that letter, and then we will present that within that grant application to show the proof that we've actually done this work, and this is our community supporter. So if you've done work in your community, I would suggest that you call on those folks that you work with to highlight and be your testimony, right? And also, a lot of grants now, one of the if you will, if I can give you a tip, partnerships are important for a lot of the larger grants now. They one of the requirements is that within communities that agencies partner to do the work. And so that is a big, each grant mostly have a scoring mechanism within them. So that's a part of your capability. It kind of highlights, what you can do to show that you can actually get this work done and who you can get it done with. So the partnerships and the community engagement and things that you've done within the community are critical when you're looking for funding, especially when you're looking to do things that are more socially related.
And thanks, Terry and Nancy, for the question. I would just add, like, what's meaningful as a merit reviewer isn't just, 25 letters of support, but looking at the quality of each of them and how, like, meaningful is what they're sharing. Particularly if you are applying for funding to build out a program for returning residents, let's say, having letters of support from folks who will ultimately be impacted by the program, who can speak to, like, your organization's role in the community, maybe past interactions that they've already had with you. something that just shows merit reviewers that your organization already has this trust, it already has this awareness, it already has this visibility. And so that sort of, makes it easier for merit reviewers to score an application high on that front. As a community member or a community organization, I would also be like, do your due diligence if someone asks you for a letter of support, whether it's for a digital equity program or the BEAD program. You are not obligated to give anyone a letter. So, like, ask your questions, learn about what the organization is applying for funding to do, understand how it will impact you and the communities you serve. So, never feel like you have to offer one. I would really, make sure that your letter of support is genuine because you support the project. And to go back to the original question of like, what does it actually look like in the community benefits agreement? So I think it is kind of dependent on the program that we're talking about. But to offer more thoughts, like from the standpoint of the Office of Broadband. So letters of support are probably the most like standard way to show that support. There's also usually in-kind matches. So if one organization is applying for funds, but another organization is going to lend the time or the space, like a room in the library, to operate this programming, that is really tangible support that can be tied to an application. Sometimes it's funding. So maybe, it's a nonprofit applying, but a local county government wants to support. Perhaps they kind of commit some funding to it. So it can come in, all shapes and forms. I'll just reinforce one more time, like being really genuine is important.
And Devin, if I can just add to that example, we received, like I stated, the Illinois Minority Business Development Agency grant. So my office in Elgin is actually, we share it with the Elgin Regional Chamber of Commerce, the Elgin Symphony Orchestra, the Downtown Elgin Neighborhood Association, because the city of Elgin provided us with free space here. So that's an in-kind donation for us. So I just wanted to share that, Devin, as an example.
Yeah, that's a great example. All right. I just received a direct question. Will we have office hours? So the context for all of these sessions is around that Illinois Digital Equity Capacity Grant NOFO coming this fall. So once that is live on the street, we will indeed have office hours and like technical assistance sessions. So if you do have specific questions about that grant opportunity, we'll have pretty directive or direct opportunities to both like walk you through that opportunity in a webinar and then any one-on-one sessions to help answer questions. Yeah, and then this individual said, we have a grant ready to go, but want to get a sense of whether we're going in the right direction before the submission. So I think looking at our state digital equity plan is the best way to start preparing now. And think about those categories of device distribution, digital literacy, digital navigation, community broadband planning, etc., as the likely categories that you'll see in the NOFO. And then once that NOFO is posted, we will have it out for at least 4 to 6 weeks before the application deadline. So you'll have plenty of time to kind of workshop it with our team to make sure it's in the right direction. All right, any final questions? I received a question, can you provide a data source for broadband planning? So you might need to clarify that a little bit, but when we talk about broadband planning, it's referring to usually like a community, so a municipality or a local government that has residents who do not have quality broadband access or who aren't happy with their options. And so they'll oftentimes bring on a consultant or an engineering firm to conduct what we've called a feasibility study. So looking at who are the providers, who are the internet service providers who currently serve our community. Maybe they do surveys, speed testing to understand whether they are the right mix of providers, and they identify challenges and the sort of like goals and desires of that local community. And they use that to either help bring in an internet service provider that meets those requirements, or working with the current service providers to, make sure they're meeting the local needs. So the best example of this is a program called Broadband Breakthrough, led by the Benton Institute in partnership with the University of Illinois, and with some support from our office. So Ling Ling or Nancy or anyone, I don't know if you have a link handy that describes that, but otherwise we can include it in the email recap.
Yeah, I'd be happy to provide a few links. We have different types of resources, and then hopefully pretty soon here in the next couple weeks, advertising the next cohort. So we'd promote that on a separate webinar as well. So I'll get those links to you.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we can wrap up for today. Thanks everyone for joining. Thank you so much, Terry, for joining us presenting, and Nancy and Ling Ling for organizing. And final announcement, check back next week at the same time, next Wednesday, 1 to 2 for our final webinar in the series, data storytelling. So we'll help you find different data sources, walk you through dashboards, what might be helpful, and yeah, we'll go from there. Don't forget to visit our website. Ling Ling put some links in the chat so you can watch our past webinars. And if you ever have any questions, broadband@illinois.gov is our email for the office.
Thank you so much, Devin. And it looks like we'll be joining you all again next week on Wednesday as well at 1 p.m. for the final webinar in this series. And we look forward to that. Hope everyone
Great.
has a great rest of their week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.